January 13th, 1999, 7:15 p.m. Mayor's Office, Toronto City Hall. Mel Lastman stared at the weather forecast on his desk. Another 25 centimeters coming, maybe more. Outside his window, the city already lay buried under more than a meter of snow, snow that had fallen in wave after wave over 12 relentless days. The plows were stuck, the buses couldn't run their routes, fire trucks couldn't reach hydrants hidden beneath waist-high drifts. And now, this. He picked up the phone. "I need to speak to National Defence." Those 7 words would make him a punchline across Canada. They would also, quite possibly, save lives. Toronto wasn't supposed to get buried like this. The city that prided itself on being world-class, cosmopolitan, too sophisticated for such provincial concerns. It wasn't Montreal, wasn't Winnipeg, wasn't one of those cities that knew how to handle real winter. And therein lay the problem. The first storm arrived on January 2nd, dumping 47 centimeters on the city. Roads became parking lots. The airport shut down. Lorne Saxberg reported to CBC viewers, "The bright lights of Yonge Street, lost in the blowing snow." Commuters abandoned cars on the Don Valley Parkway, the lucky ones who made it downtown. Time equals 3 milliseconds greater than, / booked hotel rooms, rather than attempt the journey home. But that was just the opening act. The following weekend brought another 10 to 15 centimeters. City crews worked around the clock, operators sleeping in temporary trailer camps, racking up overtime that would eventually bankrupt the snow removal budget. They pushed snow into ever higher mountains along residential streets. Homeowners shoveled their driveways, then watched plows bury their exits again. Frustration built with each passing day. "The side roads, the big roads, still not clean yet," one resident told reporters, pausing mid-shovel, exhaustion evident in his voice. Then came January 13th. By morning, another 21 centimeters had fallen. The city had accumulated more than 105 centimeters of snow that month. The TTC was hemorrhaging. Chief General Manager David Gunn issued a stark recommendation: stay home. Chances of closed subway sections reopening? Poor to nil for several days. The Scarborough RT, that technological marvel of the 1980s, proved spectacularly useless. Drifting snow covered exposed third rails. GO trains sat motionless at clogged switches. The city's entire transportation infrastructure, designed for efficiency, not resilience, was failing. And the forecast promised more. Lastman had been watching other Canadian cities. Troops had been called in for the Red River flood in Manitoba in 1997 and the ice storm that paralyzed eastern Ontario and Quebec in 1998. This wasn't unprecedented. This wasn't panic. This was pragmatism. "I'm petrified of what could happen," he told the press that afternoon. "You come to a point where you can't push it back anymore. Then, no cars move." He wasn't wrong. Toronto's narrow residential streets, charming in summer, deadly in winter, had cars parked on both sides. The accumulated snow left corridors barely wide enough for a sedan. Time equals 350 milliseconds greater than, let alone an ambulance. Fire hydrants disappeared beneath white drifts, catch basins clogged with ice, threatening massive flooding when temperatures inevitably rose. Someone would have a heart attack, a house would catch fire, and first responders wouldn't be able to reach them. So Lastman called the army. The next morning, January 14th, 4 Bison armored personnel carriers rumbled into the former Downsview military base from CFB Petawawa. 420 regular troops were placed on standby. Reservists grabbed shovels and fanned out across the city to clear bus shelters and fire hydrants. The Bisons, 8-wheeled monsters weighing over 13 tons, could go where no civilian vehicle could. Lastman himself later said, "They're fantastic. Those things go where no car can go." They became mobile emergency response units, medics and drivers navigating snow-choked streets to reach people in crisis. Hospital staff couldn't stop laughing when armored personnel carriers pulled up to emergency entrances, but the Bisons delivered patients who might otherwise have died, waiting for help that couldn't arrive. CBC's Adrienne Arsenault reported on January 14th. The city is snowed in. What's happening here may be tame for other Canadians, but this city is truly overwhelmed. She was being generous. By January 14th, the city had accumulated 140 centimeters of snow that month. That's nearly 5 feet. The city's 800 vehicles, including 5 snow melters, had already burned through more than 25% of the annual snow removal budget, and the rest of Canada was laughing. Peter Mansbridge introduced the National that evening with barely concealed irony. It might have people across this country shaking their heads, even rolling their eyes. He wasn't wrong. From coast to coast, Canadians who routinely dealt with far worse weather couldn't believe what they were seeing. Toronto, pompous, self-important Toronto, calling in the military to shovel sidewalks. It was too perfect, too delicious. The jokes wrote themselves. The image of Lastman riding atop a bison, fist-pumping like he'd just won a war against winter itself, became iconic for all the wrong reasons. Editorial cartoonists had a field day. Talk radio hosts in Calgary and Halifax howled with laughter. Toronto the good became Toronto the soft. But the people making jokes weren't looking at the actual situation. They didn't see the city's infrastructure buckling. They didn't understand that Toronto's snow removal capability was designed for normal winters, not record-breaking sieges. They didn't factor in the population density, the traffic patterns, the simple reality that 2.4 million people were effectively trapped. Council members, not consulted before Lastman's decision, seethed. "I sent a letter to the mayor January 6th with a number of recommendations," Councillor Francis Nunziata complained. "I didn't get any response, or even an acknowledgement." But Lastman didn't care about consultation, he cared about keeping people alive. By January 15th, the weather finally cooperated. No new snow fell. Temperatures held steady, meaning no immediate flood threat. Time equals 5 milliseconds / the Army reservists initially clearing catch basins shifted to sidewalks and bus shelters. The city's call for help from truck drivers and construction companies, initially met with skepticism, began to bear fruit. And then something remarkable happened. Help arrived from as far away as Prince Edward Island. Volunteers who drove 20 hours with snowplows to assist a city that didn't have adequate equipment of its own. These weren't contractors seeking profit. These were Canadians helping Canadians, the same impulse that had sent troops to Manitoba floods and Quebec ice storms. The troops themselves, many of whom had assisted with the ice storm cleanup, found the assignment frustrating. "It's kind of hard just sitting here when you want to help," one officer told the Toronto Star. They'd spent much of their time at Downsview rehabbing an old gym bowling alley, playing cards, practicing snowmobile maneuvers for future Arctic postings. They wanted to be useful. So they shoveled, they cleared, they helped, and slowly, methodically, Toronto dug itself out. The final tally shocked everyone. Snow clearing cost the city $70 million that month, more than twice its budget for the entire year. The record snowfall of 118.4 centimeters beat a benchmark that had stood since 1846. Time equals 500 milliseconds / greater than 7 million people across southern Ontario had been affected. But here's what the mockery missed. Lastman's decision worked. No one died trapped in their homes because ambulances couldn't reach them. No one burned to death because fire trucks couldn't navigate snow-choked streets. The bisons reached people in crisis. The troops cleared the infrastructure that keeps a city functioning. The volunteers from PEI brought equipment Toronto desperately needed. Years later, Environment Canada's senior climatologist David Phillips reflected on the decision with characteristic bluntness. "I think we should have called the Navy because when all that snow melted, time equals 350 milliseconds greater than there were puddles all over the city, and there were roofs that caved in from not only the weight of the snow, but also the water that was flowing. It was a month of weather terror." Lastman himself never wavered. In a 2019 interview, 2 decades after the storm, he said simply, "I know I did the right thing, and if you know you did the right thing, nothing can bother you." Even then, the storm followed him. "I was in a taxi the other day," he recounted. "The taxi driver says, 'I came the year you brought in the army.' It was really funny. It happens to me all the time now." The 1999 snowstorm revealed something uncomfortable about Canadian identity and urban reality. The country that prides itself on winter hardiness, on toughness in the face of nature's worst, couldn't quite accept that its largest city might genuinely need help. The mockery revealed a certain schadenfreude. Watching Toronto struggle felt good to people who'd long resented the city's presumed superiority. But it also revealed something else. When crisis strikes, Canadians help. The PEI volunteers didn't drive 20 hours to mock Toronto. The troops didn't complain about shoveling sidewalks because they understood the mission. The infrastructure buckled not from incompetence, but from unprecedented conditions, overwhelming systems designed for normal parameters. Today, climate scientists note that extreme weather events are becoming more frequent, more severe. Record snowfalls, catastrophic floods, infrastructure-crippling storms. The question isn't whether another city will face what Toronto faced in January 1999. The question is when. And when that day comes, perhaps we'll remember that calling for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That recognizing your limitations isn't failure, it's prudence. That protecting your citizens takes precedence over protecting your pride. Mel Lastman understood this. He made the call. He endured the ridicule. He never apologized. And he never had to.